Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Through the Fire and the SBN Small Business Network podcast. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we are joined by a very special guest. She is a leadership and freedom coach, Ms. Regina Huber. How you doing today, Regina?
I am doing excellent, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Hey, it is my pleasure to have you here. So the number one question the audience is probably wondering, who is Regina Huber?
Yeah, and I hope you're doing great too, by the way. I know we already had that little conversation before, so I know you do. But yeah, to answer your question, Ryan, I'm a transformational leadership and freedom coach and inspirational speaker. And through my company, Transform Your Performance, with the same website, transformyourperformance.com, I help leaders level up how they lead themselves and others so they can build thriving teams. But not only that, but also thriving lives for themselves. And my new book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life, is about that exactly, creating a life on your terms while actually also being a brilliant leader for self and others. And my background, Ryan, you know that already, is quite eclectic. I have had leadership roles at a global consulting firm on several different continents in different countries, opening 2 of their offices in Portugal and Brazil quite a while ago now. And then I also owned my own businesses in Argentina and Brazil later on. And after 2012, also in the United States. So when I moved to New York in 2012, I combined all that eclectic experience, some of those adventures and wisdom that I had gained through them, with my holistic studies and all my other studies to create Transform Your Performance, my current coaching and speaking practice. And today I coach leaders and I run leadership workshops. I also speak at events, at companies and conferences, other events. And I always do this through a holistic lens, because my clients and I, we believe that it's not just about the money. So it's not just about the career piece and the promotions, but leadership is really about fulfillment. It's about freedom. It's about well-being for ourselves as leaders and for our teams. And yeah, I think everybody wants to be happier themselves and then also have happier teams. So that's what I do with my clients.
Awesome. So what do you kind of mean by a holistic approach?
Yeah, what I mean by that is that, we often artificially compartmentalize, it's a difficult word, life into different areas, but they are really all connected. So you probably don't want to be a completely different person in your job or in your leader role than you are normally, authentically, right? Because it's very strenuous. It's a big task to always play a role, and usually it's not very effective. So we really want to look at all areas of your life, especially when somebody has a little bit more time to work with me, then we look how it all fits together. And sometimes people really want to focus mostly on a promotion or on some specific leadership skills, on communication, conversational intelligence, whatever it is for everybody. But most of the time, we automatically and organically also go into other areas, because everything affects everything.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I said I know from my own personal life that like the spiritual side and like the physical fitness goes together with your mindset and everything too.
Yeah. Life is a holistic phenomenon. We are holistic beings. It's not separate, although we try to think of it separately so we can talk about it sometimes, right? So it's easier to talk about, like, for example, the body, the energy, the mind, but it's really all connected.
Yeah. So You mentioned that you're kind of a world traveler, been all over the place.
Mhm.
What made you who you are today?
Yeah, so I grew up in a tiny little village on a farm in southern Germany, southeastern Germany, near the Austrian border. And I was the shyest kid in the village. So at the same time, there was some adventurous element in our family, especially on my dad's side. And I must have inherited some of that. So different family members have inherited it in different ways, I guess. And my way was to really be curious about the world and to want to travel and live in different places. I've always been extremely curious. It's actually also supposedly, according to a test, my top leadership trait, curiosity. And I believe it's a very important leadership trait too. And and so at 19, I moved to Munich from the little village. And from there, I moved to Madrid at 26. In Madrid, only 10 months later, I was promoted into a leadership role, totally unexpectedly, without any relevant background that I could think of. And just really because somebody saw that potential in me, and probably because I was very proactive in wanting to improve structures and processes and whatnot. So that was a surprise at the time. I took on the challenge and came to this challenge really with, I want to call it pure intention. I was ready to learn by doing, as I have learned most things in my life, actually, ever since then. And, it's ever since then I have been moving. I spent 7 years in Madrid. I originally thought I would stay a year, but things changed. I helped BCG open offices in Lisbon, Portugal, and in Brazil. So the office opening in Lisbon gave me an opportunity to also learn Portuguese, which then later in life allowed me to move back to Brazil actually on my own, but not before moving to Argentina and to California and other places. And then I've also really enjoyed traveling on the African continent a lot. That's just something that is very dear to my heart. I've traveled a lot in Latin America, but also on the African continent more recently.
Awesome. So what's probably your favorite place you've been?
Well, that's always a really tricky question to answer. If you ask me what's one of the most beautiful cities I've lived in, I would say from a natural layout point of view, it's Rio de Janeiro, I also really do love New York City for several different reasons. And no doubt, Buenos Aires is beautiful. Madrid is beautiful. Lisbon is beautiful. The other cities also are very attractive. I mean, Sao Paulo is a huge ocean of a city. I've also lived there, not as long as in the other places, only about probably 8 months total. But Sao Paulo is a little bit too big for me almost. It's like Mexico City. These are like huge places where I at least, I lose a little bit the overview. But 4 million or 12 million cities are interesting to me, right? Although I also really always love to go back to the little village. I was actually just back now, and it's so beautiful. It's near the mountains, lots of lakes. From where I grew up, we have a beautiful view on the mountains, and it's just beautiful. But that's what I enjoy about moving and traveling and experiencing is this exactly, the different experiences and being able to appreciate the beauty in all these places, because all of them are special and all of them have, some sides that I will appreciate more and some other sides that I will appreciate not so much. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in Rio de Janeiro, it's definitely also security. It's a big topic.
Yeah. What inspired you to create your current business, and what's the story behind it?
Yeah, so before I moved to New York City in 2012, or maybe it was toward the end of 2011, I I was in Brazil, and as I said earlier, I owned a business in Brazil. I had also owned a business in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, which was very successful. It was a bed and breakfast, no huge place, but very successful. Number one on TripAdvisor during almost the entire time it was open. Then I had a desire to move to Rio de Janeiro. And so I sold my bed and breakfast. I sold the house, not the business, but the house. And moved to Rio de Janeiro. And my idea was to also open up a business, and again a brick and mortar business, which I actually did. It was a huge undertaking to build out another house for the second time, and it's not the easiest thing in some markets to do that, especially as a woman and a foreigner, because of certain assumptions that people have about that. So it was a pretty challenging undertaking, but I was ready to open, to have the housewarming party. It was all organized. I even had a dear friend and famous samba singer who is now becoming very famous or has become very famous in Europe there. And a few days before, I found out that my business partner had stolen money from our account. And he was not really one of the main owners of the business. That was me, right? But the business depended on his name, and I had paid him for that name. And so it was an important role that he had in that respect. And so I could really not keep the business up and running without that person, which eventually led me to the very difficult decision to have to close the business down. After, not a very long time, I tried to keep it open, but expenses were very high. I don't know if you know this, Ryan, but expenses like electricity and water are really high in Rio de Janeiro for businesses, right? So it didn't make sense to struggle through this forever. So I made that decision, and I dismantled everything. I sold everything. That's of course never or hardly ever done at a profit, right, Ryan? Because first of all, nobody will pay you your time, but what we do have is an experience, and that's, I think, my profit from that situation and from that experience, right? Experience from the experience. Sorry. So that experience is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn practical lessons, but also, and most importantly, really think about or reflect on, okay, what in me created this situation? Because I do believe that we create our own reality, and I might not have done it consciously or intentionally, but somehow I created the situation. So first of all, of course, I had to really make peace with it and forgive this person, and most importantly, and that's the harder part often, is forgive myself, because the self-resentment comes up very easily in those situations, right? And the guilt feelings and those emotions or feelings, they don't really serve us. And at the time I felt quite, first of all, I really felt quite, devastated. And it was a huge shock. It was a lot of work to dismantle it. If our listeners have ever had a small business in Brazil or in Rio de Janeiro specifically, they probably know that closing a business can be harder than opening one. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And yeah, so it was a long process. There are a lot more other interesting details to it, but to keep it short, I I had to make a decision of what would be next. So I also had to make a decision to move out of victim mode and into a more self-empowering mindset, because otherwise nothing was going to move in the right direction, right? So that was a very important decision. And to really also rebuild my confidence and my self-esteem that had been destroyed by this experience to a certain extent. Now, when at first I wanted, my idea was to split my time between the two locations, because I really loved Rio de Janeiro. I didn't really want to move. But then New York had been on my mind as like a, I don't know what to call it now, backup option for a while, or at least as an interesting place to be. I had lived in San Francisco before, and I had a green card, and I had a re-entry permit, so I could re-enter. And so I tried it out. Eventually, I decided that the two locations option wouldn't really be sustainable. So I quickly sold everything I had. It was a lot of stuff at the time in Brazil, and it gave a bunch of it away. It was a huge detachment exercise, Ryan, for me, because I left, for example, 35 boxes of books. I left my favorite bed from Bali, my bamboo bed that had traveled with me all over the world several times, and some other pieces, that we just really love and that we feel attached to in our lives, or get attached to. And that was another very interesting experience to learn from. And then so I moved to New York City, and I said, okay, what can I do now with all this eclectic experience, everything that I have learned so far, the wisdom I have gained, the knowledge I have, my insights, and my holistic studies as well. And how can I put all that together into something meaningful that can help others, and that is also exciting to me.
Yeah. So you talk about your signature framework, powerful leadership transformation. Can you explain what that is to everybody?
Yeah, that was my very first framework. I have created several different leadership frameworks with different focuses. So this one is really mostly about self-leadership. It has 4 pillars, right? So the first one is a self-empowering mindset and heart set. The second is your, what I call distinctive uniqueness. It's all about your brilliance, your unique brilliance, and also what you want to work on. And then in terms of your shortcomings. And then the third element is a body and energy conscious presence. We talk so much about business presence, but we don't always talk about that piece of it. And then the fourth is a little bit of a consequence of the first 3, which is inspired and effective action. So that's what the framework looks like.
Nice. Why do leaders have so much trouble like leading from the heart?
Because it's a concept that hasn't been talked about much. I don't know any like famous leadership skill course that touches on it. Maybe you do, and it's like almost like taboo to talk about the heart in business, just like it's been taboo for the longest time to talk about energy, right? And so a lot of leaders also think that leading from the heart is weak and soft, and it's not really effective, or it's not powerful. But that's not really true. It's actually bold and courageous to lead from the heart, and it can bring more sustainable results in the long run, because it helps you really bring your team on your side, right? And to move into this space where co-creation, creative, truly creative, highly creative co-creation can happen. So there are several different elements to it. I mean, I mentioned heart set earlier. there's a reason why I don't only talk about mindset. It's about, I even talk about emotion set also, and about energy set in business, right? Because these are super important. But in the previous framework that I talked about a self-empowering mindset and heart set, because the two are just better together. We have our mind, our intellectual mind. We have our subconscious mind, which could either be self-empowering or self-limiting, as you know, and or both at different times, in different types of context. And then we have our conscious mind, our intellectual mind, which on our analytical mind, which certainly is very helpful. It's a tool, but it shouldn't be our master. And then we have our heart wisdom, and that is really that very specific, unique you wisdom that you have accumulated in your heart through your own experiences. And that's often something that we don't listen to, although if we did, I'm sure, Ryan, if I had listened to my heart and really taken the time and allowed myself to listen deeply, I could have heard that intuitive voice that could have told me, look, this is not the experience you want to make with this guy in Brazil, right? Or maybe, my higher self, whatever you want to call your true self, is wanting me to make this experience for a specific reason. I mean, without it, I also wouldn't have created Transform Your Performance, right? But I'm just saying, sometimes we dismiss intuition. It's another taboo thing in business. I wonder why, right? Because our intuition is actually, and that is coming from the heart. Our intuition is our true voice. It never lies. It never lies. So, yeah. And then, of course, heart, leading from the heart, to come back to your question in a different way. We need more compassionate leadership. So many people talk about empathy, but what we really need is compassion. I mean, we all have empathy. I don't know anybody who doesn't have empathy, frankly. But how do we use it? What we need is compassion, right? And that compassion comes from also when we allow ourselves to lead from the heart. Courage comes from the heart. Fear is in our mind. Courage is in our heart.
I love how you said that. Courage is in the heart, fear is in the mind. That's a nice way to look at things.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you tell somebody to get more in tune with their intuition and like their heart, more their heart set?
Well, first of all, trust yourself that you can hear your intuition and that it's actually valuable, right? So many people make pro and con lists when they make decisions, but in the end they throw them out because they find that they are not really helpful. If anything, make a pro and pro list for each option. That's probably more helpful than a pro and con list in most cases. But the analytical mind always wants to make sense of everything. And important life decisions, for example, don't always make sense to the people around you, or objective sense. They might make sense. So a decision might make sense to your heart, but not your mind. When I moved to Argentina in 2012 and left my leadership role at BCG in San Francisco behind to open a bed and breakfast in Argentina, of which I had no experience either, and I had no clue about. And people were thinking I was a little cuckoo at the time. Some people were thinking that. I know that because even also one of the partners that had just moved to Miami, actually from Argentina, said, well, you moving to Argentina? We just moved here because we're afraid to be kidnapped. And actually at the time, there were a lot of kidnappings, right? A friend of mine was also kidnapped, and she's not a very rich person, right? Just to put it into perspective. There are lots of carjacking and whatnot. So, and I'm not saying, it was terribly dangerous. That's not what I'm saying, but that's what was going on at the time. So it made sense to my heart. That's what I want to get it. And that was my intuition just calling me. And how can we listen to that intuition more? Well, first of all, take the time. When you have an inkling that something is off, when something feels heavy, something's off. When something feels light, it's usually right for you. Maybe not for anybody else, but for you. So that's a great indicator. Heavy, light, right? Also, if something could look perfect on paper and it could still not be right for you. So look into what it feels like. Don't overthink things when you're not sure about something, about a decision, right? So that's one thing. And also take the time to sometimes just practice and sit with yourself, sit with your heart. Just simply establish that you have the intention to connect with your heart and see what comes up and see what happens. You may want to place a hand on your heart, because while it's not exactly about the physical heart, there is a connection.
Nice. What tips would you have for someone that is looking to become a leader or a candidate for a leadership position?
Well, first of all, and it's funny because somebody asked me a similar question on the podcast today, earlier. And so I don't remember exactly what I said, but I would say that trust yourself. It's about your intention. It's about finding your authentic leadership style. You can learn some of the skills like communication. There are tools like conversational intelligence. There are other tools that you can learn. You can develop a leadership presence through not just what you say, how you dress, how you show up physically or externally, but through your energy. You can learn these things, but also your energy is, and the other way around, is impacted by your intention, right? So when you come with that intention to create the impact that you want to create, you can learn the rest. And what's really important is that self-belief that you can actually do it. At the time when I was promoted into that leadership role, I did interview, by the way. I wasn't just put there. I was one of several candidates. The other candidates were external candidates, and they did have leadership background. But I just went through those interviews doing my best, and I wasn't super attached to the outcome. I didn't know what to expect. I came with an open mind, and I was chosen, right? So come from that place. You don't need to check all the boxes before you move into a role, into a new job, into a promotion. Because if you knew everything already, it wouldn't be a step up for you. So it wouldn't mean growth, right? So accept that challenge of growth and trust yourself that you can learn the rest. And get a coach, maybe. I mean, yeah, that's always an option, right? If you think you can't afford a coach, which I don't think that's true, but I think that can actually, bring that money back very quickly, give you a great ROI. I didn't know about that option in the past, by the way. That was many years ago, right? There weren't so many coaches. But then at least get a mentor, who you can talk to, you can get advice from, and and then just do it.
Yeah, great advice. What does passion mean to you, and why is it so important?
Well, see, I used to say that passion is also in the heart. And that might be true, but I don't really necessarily love the word passion too much. I know what you mean, and I like the concept, right? So, and why? Because I like to always dissect words and to know where they come from. I have learned several different languages, and that's probably why, because I always ask myself, okay, why does this word, why does this, have this meaning? And passion really is related to suffering. Just think of the Passion of Christ or any other religious concepts, right? So I'm not religious, but I'm just saying, okay, this is an example. Passion has that connotation a little bit, really, because that's the origin of the word. So, but if because of the lack of a better word right now, let's use it as in the sense of drive, right? So what's your drive? What's the reason behind what you do? And we could also call it the why, of course, but it's a little bit different. I think the passion is that energy, again, that you bring, that enthusiasm. I like to talk about enthusiasm actually a lot, Ryan, because enthusiasm to me is that what we often call positive energy that fuels our work, and that also can fuel collaborations and and inspire them to move.
That's a nice shift in perspective you have there. Thinking of it more of as enthusiasm, what type of energy you bring instead of, the passion. Which seems
Yeah, and
like it is more from the heart.
Yeah, and everybody is free to see that as they want, right? I'm not saying it's wrong in any way. I have talked about passion myself a lot, so but it's just like, the other day I was thinking, what does that really mean, passion? Where does it even come from, that word? And actually in German, it's Leidenschaft, and Leidenschaft in German. So the first part of the word means suffering, Leiden. Isn't that interesting?
Interesting. You've wrote a couple of different books. What inspired you to write them?
Well, the first one was because I was coming from a place where I had to rebuild my confidence from that experience that I shared, right, in New York City. And when I moved to New York City, I had zero network in New York City. I knew a few people from my BCG times, but I have been in San Francisco on the West Coast. And apart from that, the few people I knew, they were always traveling, always busy. So that was not my way to build a network, really. And I went out networking. I started talking about a business that didn't even exist yet, and I sometimes felt really, to say it very clearly, really shitty. I did not feel confident at all, right? So I needed some crutches. I needed some tools and techniques to really support myself at the time. And that's how I came up with tools and techniques that I put into my book, Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine, Speak Powerfully in Any Situation, that I published in 2016, because I thought that if those tools had helped me and my first clients during the first few years, then they would certainly also help other people, and everybody should have access to them. So I shared methods of how to prepare physically, energetically, and mentally for public speaking, whether it's, online, offline, in a job interview, in a meeting, speaking up more, or in front of a room, doesn't really matter. These tools can be used for any situation, and you could just pick a couple of them, your favorite ones, and do those. And then the second book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life, Create the Life That's Perfect for You, Anywhere in the World. That's the subtitle. So Living My Freaking Amazing Life started, I think, probably 3 or maybe even 4 years ago, with some notes that I took and a few short recordings about stories, adventures that I'd had. And I've had some really crazy adventures too. But it's really about the ups and downs of life, and this very enriching life that I had led. up until last year, because last year was when I finally finished the book. So I started it, but then it was those little stories and bits and pieces were sitting on my computer for a while. And I wasn't sure what focus to give to the book. That was my challenge. So when I figured that out, that's when I finished the writing, and when I put it all together into some coherent, context. So it is a leadership book at the same time as it is an inspirational book where I want to inspire people to live a life that fits them, a life that's right for them, and to really honor the wisdom they gain along the way as they are living that life, so that they can also live their dreams. And I wanted to inspire people to find the courage. We talked about courage before, right? To start a new chapter when their inner self calls them to do that. That again is about that intuitive voice, and to do it in a way that's in alignment with who they are and what they desire truly, and not what other people desire for them, not what other people want for them, not aligned with other people's expectations, right? So because that to me is a life of thriving and of really feeling fully alive. Right? And it's not like, oh, now everything is flowing perfectly. No, that's not what I mean. And also this life could look completely different to mine. You don't have to move from continent to continent to live your dream life if you want it to look completely different, right? But what really is satisfying, in my opinion, is to live your life actively and proactively and not passively, not just be swept along, and not to walk on someone else's path or ride someone else's wave, right? So that's what I want people to inspire to do. And at the same time, also the book includes leadership lessons for the leadership of self and others at the end of each chapter, because I've learned those leadership lessons along the way for leading our lives responsibly too. So it's not just for people in leadership roles, it's also really for yourself.
Nice. Did writing the books lead you to become an inspirational speaker? Was that something you already knew you wanted to do and started before you started writing?
Yeah, it didn't lead me there, but having a book helps when you do want to speak at an event. It even also sometimes helped me to make some money at events that did not technically pay, because sometimes there was not a speaker budget, but there was a training budget, and that the organizers could tap into at a bank, for example, and they could buy, let's say, books for all the attendees, for example, right? And that's happened several times. So, and some of my speaking was lead generation oriented. So that was totally fine to go there and speak. And plus, I love to inspire. But it's always nice to also get something from the beginning. And it's great to also share written wisdom, not just spoken, with the attendees, and they have something they can take with them, right? It goes hand in hand, but it wasn't the reason for the speaking. I've always liked and loved to inspire.
What's probably your most challenging thing you do when you go just get on stages and speak to or to do workshops for everybody?
To me, the most challenging thing is to practice the talk, frankly, because when you have a signature talk, you cannot just wing it. One thing is that somebody invites you to speak on a podcast, like with you. We have a conversation. It's not scripted, right? Or another thing is that you create a specific presentation for a small group, or you do an online workshop and it's customized content for that group. Yes, you also want to practice, but a signature talk is different. You really need to exactly know the timing. You need to exactly know that you will stay on your path, on point. It's not the same. So while you might not want to to really remember or learn word by word by heart, you need to know how and what you're going to talk about. And again, not just the what, but also the how. You need to have your structure down, and practicing that is my least favorite part. Why? Because it's repetitive, and I thrive in change. I don't love repetition.
That's kind of funny because a lot of the speaking and all that stuff is kind of repetitive with everything.
But the experience on stage is actually not repetitive. And also these podcast interviews are not repetitive. You know why? Because every host is different. Every audience is different from a stage. Every organizer is different of an event, So that's actually not repetitive, because when you are on a stage or in front of a room, you connect with your audience. And I like to make those experiences, especially in front of a room where it's a smaller audience, maybe of 40 to 80 people or so. That's when it can be truly interactive, at least pieces of it, right? From a stage, you can also do interactive portions, but with a very big audience, I would still do it. But it's just a little different. The whole dynamics, they vary, right? So those situations are never the same. And the podcast recording that I had earlier today is nothing like this one. It's just different. You are a different host, The questions are different. I didn't know the questions before. So no, this is not boring to me at all.
Yeah.
It's quite the opposite.
You host the Rise to Lead podcast.
Mhm.
What inspired you to start podcasting?
Yeah, Rise to Lead was born from a desire also to inspire bold, heart-centered leadership of self and others. So again, it's not only for people and leadership roles in corporate or whatever. By the way, it's also for entrepreneurs, of course, because leadership is for everyone, and also for the leadership of self. But also really wanting to have very conversations with people, very candid conversations, conversations that we might not always hear everywhere, And that's why there are very diverse guests on that podcast, I would say, so far. So I don't have a whole lot of hundreds of episodes yet. I've only done it for a year, and I have published weekly, with a few exceptions where I've published bi-weekly for reasons of my producer being at the hospital and things like that. But so the reason was really also that to inspire, to have people think, to present different perspectives. I'm really always looking for fresh perspectives that might not have been shared so broadly.
Nice. What's probably the most rewarding part for you, podcasting?
Well, one of them is, of course, to get to know my guests, because that's the more direct contact I have. And then when people come back and say, hey, this episode really did this for me. This episode created a perspective shift, or this episode inspired me to take this step or that step, to just think differently about a situation or about my options. I always like to remind people that we always have limitless options. It's not that you don't have options. That doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist, because there are limitless possibilities. So why would you not have options? It's just not true.
Yeah, that's a nice perspective shift too, to get people to think, hey, there's a limited number of ways I can make this happen. It's just not one way that's going to make this work.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
How can people get a hold of you?
So my website is transformyourperformance.com, and it has really everything on it. There's a page for the podcast, there's a page for the books, there's a page for everything, I think. And then there's also another link if you just want to see all the social links in one place. It's transformyourperformance.com/social links. And if anybody wants to just get inspired to start that freaking amazing life for themselves, I would love to give them a create your freaking amazing life template just to get the process started. And that they can find again at transformyourperformance.com/freaking amazing life. And the freaking does not have a G. And maybe we can include the link in the description. So it's transformyourperformance.com without the www in this case, please, /freaking amazing life.
Yeah, and I'll add all that stuff to the show notes and everything for you too. So
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
Well, you said you wanted to ask me a special question at the end, and that's the only thing I think we haven't covered.
You ready for it? All right, final question. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about overcoming adversity?
Okay, there are a few steps here. Okay, so it's one thing, but it all goes together. So first, stop calling it adversity and call it experience. Second, become curious about it. A great question to ask is, how is this for me? What's the benefit in this? Right? So that is a really, really cool question to ask. And sometimes it's really just to transmute some stuck emotions, to upgrade your mindset. And most of the time, there's also a practical lesson. So most of the time, it's both. And the third thing I want to say is really step out of victim mode. This was so crucial for me in any of those situations that I have been in to make that decision to not be a victim, because that allows you to move ahead.
Wow, great advice. Well, Regina, thank you so much for coming on here. It's been a pleasure hosting you here and getting some insight on leadership from you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Ryan. And just to go back to that example in Brazil, what do you do when life gives you lemons in Brazil? You make a caipirinha.
What's that? Is that lemonade? Is that Portuguese for lemonade?
No, a caipirinha is actually an alcoholic drink. So,
No.
but it's the typical cocktail in Brazil. So, you might not drink alcohol, but it's just like a little joke on the side. So when life gives you lemons, what do you do in Brazil? You make a caipirinha.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone listening. I'm so grateful for you all.
Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is to go through the fire.